Hey everyone. If you're here today, you're probably looking at this video because it says something about what to expect for the November SAT. But if you come later in a month or two, right, and you're looking for the December SAT or the March SAT or the April and so on, don't worry, this test is going to still be the same then as it is now. There's no major trick one month to the next. So it's not going to be easier or harder then than it is now. And the SAT does a great job of having it be standardized and be similar time in, time out. And I'm just going to go through and show you the way the test is formatted and what you can expect for this November SAT and for the future, right? So if you haven't taken it before or just starting to study, you can see what to expect. I'll give you example problems. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments, all right? So what is up with the SAT, okay? So there are two parts, right? There's the reading and writing section that has 27 questions in each module. And you have 32 minutes for each module. And we'll go over what I mean by modules in a minute. And then we have the math section, which has 22 questions in each module with 35 minutes for each module. So you have more time per question on the math, but most people actually run out of time more on the math than the reading, depending, right? Sometimes people struggle more, but I think typically that's what you'll expect. Okay, so then that's just a thing to watch out for, and you'll get used to it. So there's two modules. So what is a module, right? So there's two sections. There's the reading and writing section and the math section, and each one has two modules. So there's the first module, which maybe is overall rated like a medium level. And depending on how well you do on that module, you're going to go up a level and either take 2B, which is considered the harder one if you did very well, or you'll take 2A, which is considered the easier one if you did less well, right? And the whole point of this is to try to make a better bell curve, right? The SAT wants as many people in the middle as possible. They don't want too many 800s. They don't want too many low scores. They want it to be nice and bell curve shaped. So the majority of people are scoring around, 500 per section. There'll be some people who score 800. That's awesome for them. There'll be some people who score lower, and that happens. But they really try to standardize it, and they're very good at that because, like I said, they have a lot of data on it. So those are the two modules, right? They each have either 27 questions or 22 questions, and they have their timing. So what can you expect on each section, right? So in the reading and writing, you have information and ideas, which are general like inference questions. You have central idea and details and command of evidence, and you can expect 12 to 15 overall questions on that section, right? Out of the 54 total questions. And I'm going to show you examples for each one. Then you have craft and structure, which is words and context, like vocab questions, text structure and purpose, and cross-text connections, which is where you have two passages that are either in agreement or in opposition in some way. And then expression of ideas, right? This is 8 to 14 questions. There's rhetorical synthesis, which is kind of a new type of question that I'm a big fan of. And I'll show you an example of that. And then transitions, which is like what words to use to transition from one sentence to the next. And then standard English conventions, which is the biggest part of this, and it is grammar, right? And that's boundaries, which is how you have sentences overlap or separate, and then form, structure, and sense. So I'm going to show you a question for each type. We're not going to go through how to do each question. I have videos on that already made, and I'm going to keep making more videos. I just want to give a broad, quick overview for everyone. So this is an inference question. So often you'll have a passage. Each question has its own passage, and it's usually 1 to 3 paragraphs. This is kind of a shorter one. And for this one, right, it says which choice most logically completes the text. So you probably have to read the passage. Usually you focus on the end of the passage, and then you complete it with the choices. Then you have central idea and details questions, right? So a lot of times, again, you'll have a passage. This one's from Sense and Sensibility, which is, a great novel. They often do passages from older novels or poems. And this is, according to the text, what is true about Eleanor, right? So this is sort of a details question, but you can also have central ideas where it's like, what's the main idea of the passage? So again, you sort of read it and you have your choices, right? If at any point you want to pause and try one of these questions, by all means, go ahead. Then we have command of evidence questions. There's two types. There's this type where Again, you read this short passage, and then honestly, you look at the answer choices. You should always read all the answer choices, and they're probably longer combined than the passage itself, right? And it says which finding from Granito and Alvarez's research, if true, would most directly support their claim. Sometimes you'll see things that say which most directly oppose their claim or undermine the claim. And there's also ones where you see graphs and data, and you have to read the graphs and data and use that to answer this type of question. Okay. Then we've got text structure and purpose. So if you see here, right, again, another paragraph passage. Here, this one's underlined. And then it says which choice best describes the function of the second sentence in the overall structure of the passage. So it's not always like this, but a lot of times it'll be here's a part, and then you have to understand what is happening within that relates to the rest of it, right? Which I think is a great skill to have. I have a video on this that I'll link to already made. I'll be making more on it as well. And then we got cross-text connections, which I think is a pretty classic form of a reading and writing question, right? You have two passages from two authors. Usually they are on the same topic, even if sometimes it's adjacent to each other and not exactly overlapping. And you have to sort of analyze how they agree and disagree, right? So this one says on the text, right? Based on the text, how would Falcarelli and Panetta most likely respond to fans' finding, right? So it's like you have to understand what text 2 is saying, and then what text 1 is saying, and how they would meet with each other. Okay. And then we got words in context, a classic vocabulary question where you have to either fill in the blank. You have to either fill in the blank, like here, right? So which choice completes the text with the most logical and precise word or phrase, or sometimes the word's already filled in and you have to say what the word means, right? And again, I have a video on this. It's a lot about tone and understanding whether a word is positive or negative and how the sentences are structured, right? These are, I think, manageable for most people, especially if you have a decent vocabulary, but there's a lot of strategy here. And then we got one of my favorite types, right? It's the new thing. It is rhetorical synthesis, where they give you notes from someone, and then you have to take those notes and sort of synthesize a sentence out of it, or a sentence or two. Right, so here it says the student wants to emphasize a difference in the origins of the two words. Which choice effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? And again, this is just taking the notes you have here and you sort of synthesizing it based on what they want and what their audience is. Okay, these you can really nail down. I have a video on this as well. And then we have transitions, which is kind of a mix of grammar, kind of a mix of vocabulary. And you have to think about how one sentence relates to the next, right? And combine them using the transition. It'll often just be which choice completes the text with the most logical transition. And then we've got boundaries, which is a grammar question. I think grammar is a great place to start because it is, very cut and dry as I think as the reading and writing can get. So I'll often just say which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. You can tell this is a boundaries question because the words are the same, but it's just whether it has a comma or not. And obviously that is in there, but you use that and you'll sort of understand, oh, this is a boundaries question versus a form, structure, and sense question, right? This is, again, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of English. But here we have bounds and helped, right? Helping, bounds that helped, and bounds to help. So that's a different verb, right? Helped, helping, helped, and to help. Okay. So those are the topics and the types of questions you can expect to see on the verbal. And then math, there's a lot more specific small topics. So I actually like to start with reading and writing if you're struggling with that, because there's a sort of less variety of questions and you can really drill down and sort of understand the basics there. But in math, there's sort of four broad topics. There's algebra, the classic, right? Then there's advanced math, which is not as hard or as crazy as it sounds. Geometry and trig, another classic, and problem solving and data analysis, which has some questions that I think a lot of people haven't seen before. But again, it's not too bad. Algebra is 13 to 15 questions, and it can be linear equations. You'll definitely see one of those in one variable. You also see linear equations in 2 variables, linear functions, linear inequalities in 1 or 2 variables, and systems of 2 linear equations in 2 variables. Okay, so linear equations in 1 variable, something like this, right? You have an equation on one side, or you have an equation, right, with this expression, you have 1 variable, and then you sort of often have to solve for that variable or some form of that variable, right? Like here it's asking for 3t. There's usually a reason why they're asking for something. Then we have linear equations in 2 variables, right? So again, linear equation, right? There's not exponents or square roots or anything odd like that. And we have 2 variables, right? W and R. Not too bad, right? I think that's another classic sort of algebra question. And then linear functions, which might be the most classic math question you get in high school. Well, you can see a chart. Sometimes you'll see a graph. And again, you often have to solve for some variable or constant. Okay. And then inequalities in 1 or 2 variables, right? Very similar to functions and equations, except there's usually a maximum and a minimum involved. So here the total budget to spend on these chairs is $14,000. So that sort of sets a max in this question, right? I've done a video on this question specifically. And systems of 2 linear equations and 2 variables, right? So at how many points do the graphs of the equations intersect in the xy plane, right? So another classic, you learned that in algebra. A great question. You can graph them, you can use Desmos, you can use it algebraically. And then we have advanced math, right, which has 3 parts, equivalent expressions, but nonlinear functions and then nonlinear equations in 1 variable and systems of equations in 2 variables. So an equivalent expression is something like this: x squared plus 3x minus 40. Which of these is equivalent? And then you sort of factor here, right? It can get a lot more complicated than this, but that's the general idea. Then we also have this one here, nonlinear equations in 1 variable and systems of equations in 2 variables, right? The reason this one's here is if you multiply out the x plus 6, you're going to get x squared. So anything with exponents is going to sort of go into this category or into the nonlinear functions category. And finally, nonlinear functions, right? So it's like the other one, but it's exponential equations often, or square root equations. So here it's just asking for the y-intercept, which isn't too bad, right? You just plug in 0 for x and then solve for y. So I think advanced math sounds scary, but it's really not too bad. They can definitely get very hard, but any of ththese questions have a high level of difficulty sometimes and a low level. So you shouldn't be like, oh, I can't do advanced math. That's the part I'm going to blow off. You can definitely study for every part. And then we've got geometry and trig, right? So we're going to have area and volume. You have circles, lines, angles, and triangles. I wrote angels, but maybe there's something in there. And then right triangles and trigonometry. Okay. So I think 3 and 4 really go together. You really want to get triangles down. That is a huge benefit. And then circles and area and volume, I think a lot of people just need to review. It's a lot of 9th grade math for a lot of people, some 8th grade math. So something like this, right? A cylinder has a diameter of 8 inches and height of 12 inches. What is the volume in cubic inches of the cylinder? Not too bad a question if you know the formula for a cylinder, and they give you the formula, but you want to already know that going in so that you know how to use it and it feels natural to you. Then you can have something like this, right? I'm going to move down, and it's a circle here. You're given the circumference, and you have to find the length of the arc, right? I've done a video on this, which I'll link to. And lines, angles, and triangles right here, they don't draw it out, so it's probably helpful to draw it out, or just understand the concept of how many degrees are in a triangle. And it's the measures of angle B is 52 degrees, and the measure of angle C is 17 degrees. What is the measure of angle A? Okay. And again, great question, solid question. You can definitely nail this down. And then right angles and trig, which does a lot of cosine, sine, and tangent, right? So here in triangle JKL, cosine K equals 24 over 51, and angle J is a right angle. What is the value of cosine L? So I've done a video on this that I'll also link to. And then we've got problem solving and data analysis, right? Which can be up to 7 questions. I mean, this is a rough estimate. It could be a little more than 7. Maybe sometimes it could be 4, but that's a general estimate. So we got percentages, which is a great place to start because they'll definitely come up. They're not too difficult once you practice them again. Then evaluating statistical claims, which is sort of a weird, kind of tricky one. But once you see them a few times, you'll sort of get the gist. Inferences, another one that maybe not everyone has seen. One variable data, distributions, and measures of center or spread, right? Measures of center and spread can be anything from like median and mode to mean and range. Then we got probability and conditional probability, another great place to be. And then ratios, rates, proportional relationships, and units. And then you have two variable data models and scatter plots. All right, so percentages, right? Whoops, I kind of had this overlap here. Of 900 beads, 900,000 beads, 828,000 are silver. What percentage of the beads are silver, right? So pretty basic question. I've done a video on this we can go over. I'll link there. And then evaluating statistical claims, observational studies, and experiments. This one doesn't come up too often. It's probably the one that comes up the least of all the types of questions I've seen, but it is helpful to do once you sort of understand the process. So it'll give you some sort of situation. Like here they say a sample of 40 fourth grade students was selected at random from a certain school. The 40 students completed a survey about the morning announcements, and 32 thought the announcements were helpful. Which of the following is the largest population to which the results of the survey can be applied? And it's sort of helping you seeing if you can understand like the reasoning behind studies and samples and how you can use samples to understand things about a population. Okay, so it's a great, I think, addition. And then we have inferences from sample statistics and margin of error. Right, so this is another question where they ask about margin of error. They say 1,000 people were chosen out of 50,000, and they give you an estimate of 35%. And you're also given a margin of error of 3%. And it's sort of seeing, again, how well you understand statistics and how you can use them in real life situations. And then we've got one variable data, distributions and measures of center and spread. Here it's a frequency table. It can be a box and whisker plot. It can just be a list of data. And you have to find like mean, median, mode. You have to think about how they can change if you add or take away numbers, and so on. And then we got probability, which I've always been a fan of, even though I know it can be kind of tricky sometimes. They can give you a table, and they'll sort of ask what happens if you pick something at random or you pick two things at random. Right here, they're just asking for one thing. I've done a video on this one, which I'll link to. And then we've got ratios, rates, proportional relationships, and units, which if you haven't done before too much of, I would recommend for sure to start with this as well. This percentages, maybe then this one will be next. And it's just understanding how like similar things work with each other and how you can use that to find missing pieces. Right, so here there's a rectangular region, and it's asking what happens if you change one part but want to keep the ratio. And then two variable data models and scatter plots right here. We have to think about, they sort of give you the situation, real life situation, and ask you to think about what type of graph or model you would develop off of it, right? So would it be increasing linear, decreasing linear, increasing exponential, or decreasing exponential? And that is it for the types of questions you'll see on the test, right? So, there's a broad variety. If you've already done the test, you sort of understand what will be on it. If you started studying, that's great. But I just wanted to show you all the general gist to understand where you could focus in, right? So you could try these out. You could go to the ones I've linked to try those. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help in the comments. I'm going to keep pumping out videos. I'm going to make a video on how to study, like a great study plan, and that's all coming soon. So don't worry. Enjoy this process, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.